Hello everyone. So we will be talking about our first chapter, endocrine system. Now, since we are actually this is our first lecture and this is an online course, just to be clear, I'll telling you some rules or some like things that we'll do in this course. So each chapter will be divided into two or three short lectures, and I will be uploading it them by part 1, part 2, like that. So but the PowerPoints will be together. Only the lectures will be divided into short two or three videos, depending on the length of the chapter. Now, for example, endocrine might will have probably will have three short segments. Now, while we do the lecture, you will see that in lecture in certain areas, in some slides, I have intentionally left blanks like this. Okay, this is something that we will actually discuss while we are talking about or while we are discussing the lecture. But there will be some questions after we finish each important concept, which will be called as uh, questions like this. This will be called as concept checks. So after we finish each important concept, we will have this bunch of questions. All right. So for example, here we have three, and at the end of each chapter, we will have all the concept checks done. Now, how you will do this? This is kind of an assignment. The blanks that I showed you, that is not just an assignment, that's just for quick discussion while we are doing, but these are the assignments. Okay, so we will also discuss this while I'm like discussing this, but for certain questions I might not tell you the answer. For some I will, for some I might not, but I will indicate you to the right area where you can or you will find the answers. All right, so you will work after we work through, as we finish each lecture, you will work through these concept checks and keep going, because these concept checks will be due after we finish each chapter. Okay, for example, this is chapter 16, which is endocrine system, which we are starting. So after we finish chapter 16, then you will have to submit all the concept check questions that we have discussed throughout these three short lectures. All right, and you do not need to submit the questions. All you have to do is type the answers in a Word file or a PowerPoint, anything, and then submit in Canvas, and the Canvas will actually show where to submit. It will say submit here, concept check 1, concept check 2, like that. So you will submit in that particular area. Just upload the file, just like you submit assignments, like that. So these are will be treated as your in class quizzes, and this will be part of your quiz points. Actually, pretty easy thing to do. Is just to check your concepts, just to make your ideas better. We will just do this, and these are important things actually. So when you will be actually studying for preparing for the exam, these are the concepts that you should be like focus on. Also, that's the whole idea behind this concept checks. All right, so let's get started with endocrine system. So what is endocrine system? What is endocrinology? First of all, this is study of hormones, right? And all our endocrine organs. So the endocrine organs really secrete hormones. So when we study endocrinology, we study both. For example, pineal gland, hypothalamus, pituitary, thyroid, parathyroid, adrenal, pancreas, gonads. These are all the organs. Okay, these are the organs, the endocrine organs, but they secrete certain hormones. Okay, so the hormones, and what are hormones, we will get into that. But whatever, whenever a organ is secreting a hormone, that is most likely to be an endocrine organ. But they are different, obviously. Each organ will have their own kind of hormone. So, what we will discuss, we will talk about important function between hormonal control firstly and the neural control of body functioning, because you have already covered neural control in 208. There's similarity between these functions, but there's also difference. So, we'll study the difference between them. We'll study the major endocrine organs, their locations. We'll talk about hormone system, and there is another two system, paracrine and autocrine system, which is not exactly the same, but they have some similarity. Which also talk about how hormones are classified chemically and their major hormones, and from which target, major hormones and how they affect their target organs. So all of these will be our discussions. So, firstly, what is an endocrine system? So, an endocrine system is a system that acts with the nervous system, and it coordinates and integrates. So, coordinates and integrates activity of body cells. All right. And when we talk about activity, what activity we're talking about? We're talking about growth, development, reproduction, maintenance of nutrient, water, electrolyte, like production and maintenance of these things, regulation of our metabolism, majorly is controlled by hormone, and then also to some extent body defenses. So these are the activities or the functions that hormones actually coordinate or help the body with in conjunction with the nervous system. All right. So also like I said, hormones with the help of actually they also regulate the metabolic activity, but hormones cannot function without blood. Why is that? Because blood is the substance that circulates the hormone throughout our body. Okay, so hormone cannot go on its own, it cannot walk obviously. So blood actually will circulate that. Now this responses, like you have studied in nervous system in 208, nervous system function is very rapid. For example, action potential stays for just few fraction of seconds, right? And then it acts immediately. But endocrine system is not like that. The effect actually lasts longer, and it takes time to create the response also. So this is a slower system. So if we directly compare these two systems, then we will see that nervous system actually initiates response really rapid, and endocrine system initiates response really slow. The nervous system have slow duration response, endocrine system have long duration response. Nervous system, they work via neurotransmitters and action potentials, but like we just discussed, endocrine system hormones are released into the blood, so they work with the help of blood. Nervous system have specific locations determined by axon pathways, but that is not the case for endocrine system, because they act as diffuse location. So they can, which simply means they can be produced in one location and they can diffuse away with the with help of blood and act in a completely different location. Okay. And neurotransmitter act typically of short distances, generally they don't travel via long distance, but hormones actually can, just like I said, it can travel pretty long distance. So these are the basic differences of the two systems. Now if we consider the endocrine system, obviously we have to talk about endocrine glands, which are these are the glands that produce the hormones first of all, right? But they lack ducts, means if this is the organ, they're producing it, this will release their product, which is the hormone, into blood directly. So it will, that hormone will be circulated with the help of blood. For example, pituitary, thyroid, parathyroid, adrenal, all of these are endocrine glands. And hypothalamus is actually the control system which acts as a neuroendocrine organ. We'll talk about this a lot. But there are some substances or there are some organs which actually are exocrine glands, which simply means that, for example, sweat, saliva, um, these organs actually produce some non-hormonal substances, and they are connected to the outside of a body with the help of a duct. And whatever these organs are, for example, sweat gland, right? Sweat gland produces sweat, and this has to be transported to the outside part of the body, and that's why we actually can feel sweat. So sweat comes outside, and that is done with the help of the duct. right? So therefore we will not see this presence of this duct in a endocrine system. They lack ducts, right? Example of exocrine like sweat gland, saliva, all of that. But there are some organs which can act as both. They can be endocrine and exocrine. For example, pancreas, gonads, placenta. So they can produce an hormone, but they also have a duct. There are other tissues and organs that also produce hormones. For example, we will talk all about them like small intestine, stomach, thymus, kidneys, even heart produces its own hormone. So then the question comes that how are we going to define hormones, right? So hormones are basically chemical messengers. They are chemical substance that act as messenger, right? These are chemical messengers, and they actually work with the long distance chemical signal. And how do they travel? Most of the time they will travel via blood, in certain cases maybe lymph. So therefore if we have to define hormone, these are chemical messengers of the endocrine system that works long distance with the help of chemical signal via blood. Chemical messenger of endocrine system that works long distance in response to chemical signals via blood. So couple of things. So therefore we are clear how hormone works. So they are produced at one point. Suppose this is the point of production, then they can travel really long distance with the help of blood, and they might work at a different location on their target. But we also have two other kind of system which is not exactly endocrine system, but we should know about them. For example, autocrine system. Here also we create certain kind of chemicals, but whichever cell is producing these chemicals, that they create actually effect on the same cell. So that's why it's called as autocrine. There's another thing called paracrine. Again, none of these are part of endocrine again. So here they also produce a chemical, but this chemical will work actually locally in the nearby cells. Okay, so this is the difference between hormone and paracrine is this actually works locally. These are both of these autocrine and paracrines are local chemical messengers, and they're not part of the endocrine system. Okay, because they don't autocrine don't travel at all, and paracrine, if it travels like really short distance, acts locally. So if we have to define our chemical messengers, which is hormone, we have to define it, or we have to if we have to classify hormones, then how should we classify them? We'll classify them in two categories: amino acids and then steroids. Amino acid simply means, as you know, so these are amino acid derivatives. These are mostly proteins or peptides. Why? Because proteins, peptides are made up of amino acids. And the other category, which is one of the major category, is the steroid hormones. And all of these steroid hormones, if you remember, are all synthesized from cholesterol, because these are all fat molecule. You learned this in chapter 2, right, in 208. All are synthesized from cholesterol. All gonadal and adrenocortical hormones, these are all steroid hormones, right? Now hormones, doesn't matter what kind of hormone it is, they will have a target cells, which means they will actually be produced at one location and go and bind to the receptor of its target cell. So tissues, one particular type of hormone will have one type of target cell. It's not going to affect anything else, it's only going to affect its target cell. And then hormones might alter the target cell activity. That's its job. So if it is this, suppose this is hormone 1, if it is supposed to act on your thyroid gland, then it is only going to act on your thyroid, all right, or the related cells. It's not going to affect kidney or heart or anything else. So it is very, very specific. So this is a characteristic of hormone. Another way we can actually classify hormone is by their chemical nature and receptor region. So firstly, which is water soluble hormones. All amino acid hormones except thyroid, these are all water soluble hormones. Why? Because they are soluble in water, but they cannot enter any cell. They have a target cell, but they cannot enter the cell. They only act on the receptor that is sitting on the plasma membrane. They act via a second system, a second messenger system, which is called G protein second messenger system. So in this case, suppose this is the cell and this is the hormone. This hormone will have a specific receptor. So all this hormone can do, it can bind to this receptor, right? It can bind here, but it cannot enter the cell. So what it can trigger though, it can trigger a second messenger system, which is typically G protein, and this G protein will do the required job. As opposed to that, lipid soluble hormones, which are steroid hormones and thyroid hormones, they very much can enter. They also have a receptor, of course, but with the help of the receptor, they will enter into the cell and they will directly activate the genes in the nucleus, right? They can enter the cell. So these are the two basic huge difference between the category of hormones. So we'll first talk about the water soluble hormones. So these water soluble hormones are amino acid based hormones except thyroid, and they act through second messenger systems. And what are these second messenger systems? Cyclic AMP and PIP2 calcium, IP3, all of these are second messenger systems. So briefly, how do they work? The steps. So suppose there's a hormone which is the first messenger. So that is trying to act on this particular cell. So it won't be able to enter, so it is going to bind to its receptor. And after it is there, then the G protein will be activated. Okay, the receptor activates the G protein. In the third cell, the G protein activates another molecule called adenyl cyclase. This adenyl cyclase converts the cell ATP into CAMP, and CAMP is our second messenger. Okay, so what is CAMP will do? CAMP will actually activate protein kinase. Okay, so protein kinase is an enzyme in the cell, and when this done, then this protein kinase is activated now. So this protein is now activated. This is an enzyme actually that is activated. Now this activated enzyme actually will do whatever it's required to do. For example, whatever cellular secretion or stimulation it is, or maybe it wants to open some ion channel, whatever function this needs to be done, this protein kinase actually will do. So okay, so activating other enzyme, opening receptor channels, anything that is required to do. So like you see, so the first messenger, the hormone, is actually not directly doing anything. It's just influencing the system, creating another second messenger, and that is activating the enzyme that will actually do the job. So that's why this is called as a second messenger system. There are other second messenger systems also. For example, PIP2 calcium signal mechanism. It works the same way. It activates G protein, but the effector enzyme is not protein kinase here. It will be phospholipase. There are other, and it actually activates two other type of second messengers like CAMP. Instead of CAMP, here DAG or IP3. These second messengers are also these are activated. Calcium also can act as a second messenger system. You do not need to go into a whole lot of details of this mechanism. So this is the basic mechanism we just discussed. But you should know the examples. For example, IP3, DAG, calcium, these are all second messengers. There are other signaling mechanism, for example, CGMP, okay, instead of CAMP. That's also second messenger. And there are certain hormones though, for example, insulin. Although most hormones do not directly work with a second messenger system, but some hormones do. For example, insulin, it can work with second messenger system as well. Now that's the water soluble. Now how do these lipid soluble steroid hormones work? So like I said before, they actually work directly, right? So lipid soluble hormones or thyroid hormones, they diffuse to the target cell. Like suppose this is the hormone, they will diffuse. They will easily enter with the help of the receptor in the cell, and they will form a complex called receptor hormone complex. Now this receptor hormone complex will also enter the nucleus. Once it's entered the nucleus, then what it will do, it will bind to a specific region of the DNA. And it will bind to the specific region. Why? Because it wants to initiate DNA transcription based on the region that it is binding. So it will actually helping create DNA transcription. It will produce more mRNA, And mRNA, obviously, as you have studied in 208, is going to create specific proteins, because mRNA will translate into a protein, and that protein will actually do the functional job. So therefore, it will now finally, this mRNA will export out of the nucleus, and it will create the new protein that will trigger the response. So here the approach is totally direct, so it is not really working via any second messenger or anything. It's directly entering into the nucleus, working on the gene, creating a new transcription, and then finally a new protein that is actually doing the job. So therefore, this is called as direct gene activation with the help of intracellular receptors. There is no second messenger in this case. So if we talk about the concept checks, like I was saying, so as we finish chapter 16, you will be finishing up or working through all these concept checks, and then it's submitted in Canvas. Okay. So which two endocrine glands are found in neck? If we go back and see in this picture over here, in neck area, we actually see thyroid and parathyroid. So pineal gland, hypothalamus, pituitary, this is most majorly in our head area. Thyroid, parathyroid is a neck area. Thymus is actually in the chest area. Adrenal, pancreas in the stomach or abdomen area, and gonads is actually in the lower abdomen, right? So these are the major endocrine organs. So the first answer of is basically the thyroid and parathyroid. I'll come to number 2. Now, which of the following can act as second messenger? We discussed details about CAMP, calcium, inositol, all these are second messengers. So basically, all of these are second messengers. Now, the second question. Consider the signaling mechanism of water-soluble and lipid-soluble molecule. In each case, where are the receptors found, and what is the result of the hormone binding to the receptor? So here I'm not going to say in whole lot of details. So we just discussed this. For example, how the lipid soluble steroid hormone works. So you're going to talk about the direct gene activation method. And for the first one, which is the water soluble, you're going to talk about the messenger system. You can use example of the CAMP system, right? So discuss that. Now, next thing we'll talk about the hormone release. So we'll talk about how hormone release is regulated. Okay. Now here, so hormones are majorly, this actually is controlled by a feedback system. So if you remember from 2A, there are two feedback systems, positive and negative. In one, if there is too much effect is created, then that effect is inhibited. And that exactly what happens in the hormonal system, in the endocrine system. If too much of hormone is created by the target organ, then that can inhibit further hormone release. So too much, for example, suppose there is too much of testosterone or estrogen, these reproductive hormones are created, or too much of growth hormone is produced, you will have, or too much of metabolic hormones are produced, and you will have too much of metabolism going on, which is not good for your body, right? So no hormone secreted in too much amount is good for our body. So then the body will cut down that process, production of further hormones, until it gets back into a normal level. So that's how the hormone works. If you remember, this feedback system is basically the negative feedback system, because in positive feedback it's exactly the opposite. Once it is produced, it will continue to be produced until the job is done. All right, so the levels vary within a very narrow desirable range. So actually we don't produce a lot of hormones. It's a very narrow range of hormone we need to do our job. Hormone is released by the trigger of endocrine gland stimuli or nervous system modulation. So we will talk about this one by one. So let's talk about hormonal stimuli first. What is hormonal stimuli? Hormonal stimuli is basically, it's a 3-step process. So we have hypothalamus in our brain, which is a neuroendocrine organ. All right. So what is this does? The hypothalamus actually secretes the first set of hormone. Okay. Set number 1. When these hormones are secreted, that affects the anterior pituitary gland. Now, anterior pituitary will create some more hormone, which is the set number 2. Now, these guys, this set number 2 of this travel, they will travel via blood. Okay, and they will travel to the target organ. For example, it can be thyroid gland, it can be adrenal gland, or it can be gonad. So they will travel via blood, and then here some more hormones will be produced. So set number 3, which is the final hormone, and then they will create the final effect, or they will do the final function. So basically, starting from hypothalamus, there is also posterior pituitary, but posterior pituitary works a little bit differently. We are mainly talking about anterior pituitary here. So when set number 1 is produced, they affect the anterior pituitary. Set number 2 hormone is produced, they travel with the help of blood, and then they affect the target organs, where set number 3 hormones are produced, which actually do the final function. So that's hormonal stimuli, one hormone stimulating the other, then the other.